right, everyone. Well, welcome to Sunday school. I have just left probably, and I'm headed to the airport. I got to catch a flight down to Phoenix, and then I got to drive, 2.5 hours to Yuma so that I can drop off my car first thing, and then I got to hit the border and be to the dentist by 9 o'clock. So, I'm already hitting the road, but I wanted to take some time and go through the sixth command with you all. Quick disclaimer, I don't know if there's any kids in the room. I'm going to do my best. I'm actually filming it in my office, so it may look a little bit different, but I'm going to try and keep it at about half an hour, and then you can have conversation as you feel you need to, or just take the rest of the time off as you wait for your kids to get out of Sunday school. But the disclaimer I want to make is what we're going to be talking about, and some of these are age appropriate, they're adult appropriate. We're going to be talking about adultery and all that entails. And so if there are children in here, just kind of be aware that some of the things that we discuss might not be appropriate for their age. I don't tell you how to parent or what to discuss with your kids, when or why. But I think that it's just kind of important that you have that little disclaimer in case there are any kiddos in there. But we're going to talk about the sixth command today, and that is, you shall not commit adultery. And just so some kind of review, we talked last week about do not murder. Do not murder with your intentions. Do not murder with your words. Do not murder with your hands, and all that entails. Now, the large catechism is divided up into lines, at least the one that I'm using here. And so I've written down a couple lines on your study sheets. We'll go through that and just kind of really decipher the truth behind what Luther was trying to teach his people back then. And some of the verbiage is interesting, so we do have to keep in mind that this was written over 500 years ago, and people talk different. But I want to start by reading this first note out of the large catechism. You can see it right here on this first page. It says this: Luther had been married for almost 4 years when he wrote the large catechism. His former life as a monk makes his commands on the sixth commandment all the more interesting and powerful. Luther keenly discerns that chastity is not a matter of vowing of a life to live a celibate life, but of honoring God and one's spouse with one's whole being, thoughts, words, and actions. Marriage should be cherished and honored as divine estate. And he's going to use that term estate throughout the entire teaching. God created this institution before all others and blessed it above all the rest. And since he brings children into the world through it, he provides all other estates for its support and benefit. And I love that right there. It just kind of gives us a little bit of framework as we begin to navigate through some of Luther's thoughts here. And it's very important to discuss marriage, because we're all impacted by marriage. We're all impacted by marriages that break apart. We're all impacted by healthy marriages. We're all impacted by marriages that are unhealthy. I don't think we realize that, but marriage has an unbelievable influence on society. So we're going to start with line 200. Now, as you go through this, of course, you can pause this as you need to and have your own discussion, or have a private discussion with your spouse, however you want to do. But I think these things are very important to discuss here. This is what line 200 says. The following commandments are easily understood from the explanation of the preceding commandments, for they are all to show that we must avoid doing any kind of harm to our neighbor. We are a loving people. We don't wish anything bad or wrong or harm on anyone. But they are arranged in fine order. In the first place, they talk about our neighbor personally. Then they proceed to talk about the person nearest him, or the closest possession next after his body, namely his wife. She is one flesh and one blood with him, so that we cannot inflict a higher injury upon him in any good that is his. Therefore, it is clearly forbidden here to bring any disgrace upon our neighbor regarding his wife, regarding their marriage relationship. Now, I didn't put Genesis 2:23 and 24 on the sheet. I apologize for that, but I am just going to read it here. It's just straight from my Bible. You can look it up as you need to. This is what it says. Then the man said, at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. Now, why would the fifth and sixth commandment be in that order? Or should I say the fourth and fifth and sixth commandment be in that order? Honor your father and mother, do not murder, and then there is do not commit adultery. Do you think that was just happenstance, or is there a divine line of thinking that God is trying to teach his people? And I believe that that's what Luther was kind of alluding to, is that the order of the commands builds that foundation and that framework for our society. Now, why would it be in that order? I believe, for me, and you can pause this and discuss, it sets up kind of a family hierarchy. And not only does it set up a family hierarchy, it sets up a societal hierarchy. And hierarchy, and we don't like those words in culture today because we don't like to be, we don't like to have any kind of authority structure in our life because people are naturally prideful and they do not like accountability. But the family hierarchy means a lot. And the father and the mother is the ultimate, is the top of that hierarchy, with the husband being the lead over his wife. And that is not a disgraceful thing. That's not an overbearing thing. That's the way God intended it, to get the best, out of both genders. Because remember, two genders, that's all there is, only two. It's important in that relationship that a father and mother are committed to one another. Now, why is adultery more destructive than murder? Is it more destructive than murder? Is it destructive in different ways than murder? I'm going to make a case, and you can discuss amongst yourself, that in fact, adultery can be at times more destructive than murder. Number one, murder, we know, is very destructive. It's sin. I'm not debating on which is the worst sin, but what I'm saying is adultery has more of an effect on society than many times murder does. Now, I had a friend that was murdered. Terrible tragedy. Young Christian gal, nicest gal you ever want to meet. Horrible situation. Maybe I've shared, maybe I haven't. Anyway, she was murdered. Terrible. Now, I remember the devastation that caused. I remember what happened through that. There was so many relationships that were mended. People came together, grudges dissolved in the wake of this horrible tragedy. God used that pain and that horror and that sin to bring people back together that were affected by this sin of murder. Now, in adultery, all it does is split relationships. All it does is splits children, brothers and sisters. It splits them as they take sides with parents. It even splits relationships that the couple had with other couples and other families. So it splits those apart too. It splits the bond between husband and wife. It splits the bond between each spouse and their God, and then their parents, and then all these things. It just fragments, and it just has a ripple effect of fragmenting all throughout culture, all throughout their communities. Now, I will say this. I have known people who have committed adultery. We had a couple that we knew at our last church that the wife had an affair. She committed adultery for 2 years with the neighbor. Through the grace and miracle working power of God, there was restoration. Their family is close. Their marriage was saved. They've been married, I think, 20 years past that. So there is restoration that can happen. The reality is, unfortunately, it doesn't happen all too often. This was just kind of the, one of those cases where they were both extremely submitted to what God wanted to do and allowed God to work. But adultery creates so much pain, so much mistrust, so much betrayal that it really is hard to come back from it. I'm I'm going to go on to line 201. So basically we can see how adultery fragments society, how adultery will fragment a church, how it will fragment a family, how it can fragment a business and completely create mistrust that many times cannot be healed. And, with those fragments, it's very rare that you see relationships find restoration through the tragedy. It is very rare. So God is saying, do not commit adultery, because if you do, it will destroy everything around you. God knows best. Line 201, this is what it says. The commandment takes aim at adultery, because among the Jewish people it was ordained and commanded that everyone must be married. The young were engaged to be married early, and the virgin state was held in small esteem. Yet neither were public prostitution and lewdness tolerated as they are now. Therefore, adultery was the most common form of unchastity among them. Now, basically what he's saying is when he wrote this, adultery wasn't as, it was not as celebrated then. It was celebrated then, but not as much as it is now. Now we have, you have whole cultures of what they call, I guess they call them swingers, where they have multiple partners while they're still married. There's now people that are polygamy, and now husbands and wives have decided they can have boyfriends and girlfriends. So the marriage covenant has been fragmented and desecrated and just kind of made as an inconvenience. And so, we see that now, that all the things that God says are impure have now been invited into the marriage, thus creating this adultery culture, this adultery lifestyle. And people adhere to this. But God is saying this, and I love this statement right here. God has a higher standard, that it doesn't matter what the culture does or how the culture defines marriage or defines sexuality or defines the marriage bed or whatever. God is saying, nope, the marriage bed is for one man, one woman, husband and wife in the covenant of marriage only. Anything outside of that is sin. Matthew 5:28. But I tell you, this is Jesus talking, that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So even to look at a woman with desire or with lust is sin. And this is big with men, because as men, we are designed to be visual creatures. We appreciate beauty. We appreciate a beautiful woman. I am very fortunate. I married a very beautiful woman. And you ask my wife, she has my eye much of the time. All the time, actually, at least in my mind. But we have to work, and this is a discipline that we have to do, and especially when you're young, and we'll get into this, especially you men, of making sure that we discipline our eyes and our minds not to fall into the trap of lustful looking and lustful thinking. So what is adultery? Let's talk about what that is. It just doesn't just have to do with intercourse. It isn't about just having intercourse or having sexual relations with someone who is not our spouse. It is so much more. It is the betrayal of vows. It's the betrayal of commitment. It is the betrayal of love. It is the betrayal of covenant at a marriage level. Now, adultery is a Hebrew word. I don't have it written down, but just kind of get this in your hearts. Adultery is a Hebrew word, na'oth, and it's the same, and it means adultery, but it has the same word in the Hebrew language as idolatry. In other words, replacing something in your heart with what should be there. As a husband, my wife has a what's the word? Pedestal. That's the word. Sorry. A pedestal on my heart. My pastor growing up, William Wolfson, he taught us young men, always make sure that your wife is at the highest pedestal in your heart. And he was right, because he wanted to guard our marriage against these things. Okay? Can you commit adultery? And here's another one. Can you commit adultery if you're not married? If you're not married, the podium, or the what's the word? I just used it. The pedestal of your heart should be God. So as a single man, single woman, the pedestal of your heart needs to be God. And that is to be, you're kind of reserving that seat for your future spouse. Now, in today's culture, it's very common, as even in the church, it is extremely common for, this is kind of how things go. Boy and girl meet. They begin to have sexual relations, they move in together, they get pregnant, and then they get married in that order. And that's very, very common. Even with young people in the church, it is not frowned upon. I'm going to tell you this right here. If you sleep with someone outside of marriage that you're not married to, you are in adulterous sin. If you live with someone that is not your wife or not your husband, you are in sin. That is an adulterous sin. That is just the biblical facts about it all. But you can commit adultery outside of marriage is what I'm getting to. Sex outside of marriage is evil and it's sinful because sex is so powerful and that attraction is so powerful and that commitment is so powerful that what happens? It creates children and it creates emotional bonds and it creates soul ties. It creates a bond with another human being that is designed to be between one man, one woman in the context and covenant of marriage for life. That's it. We were designed to have sexual relations with one person for our entire life. Okay? Sex between a man or a woman and a woman is absolute sin because that is not in the context of marriage. And let me just say this, and I'm preaching to the choir here. The government doesn't define marriage. You can say that, a man and a man or a woman and a woman can get married, or a man and a man can get married and have all this stuff, and you can marry your dog, your cat, your fish, whatever. The government can say that, but the government doesn't define what God created. Want that to be extremely clear. If you are having sex in any other connotation outside of one man, one woman in the covenant of marriage that God establishes, God is the one who establishes that covenant. You are in sin. Line 202. But among us there is such shameful mess and the very dregs of all vice and lewdness. Therefore this commandment is directed against all kinds of unchastity, whatever it may be called. Now, unchastity, we don't use that word chastity or chaste, or we don't use those words too often anymore. But unchastity or unchaste is relating to or engaging in sexual activity, especially of an illicit and extramarital nature. So what kind of vices? He's talking about all kinds of vices and lewdness. What kind of vices are available? Okay, let me say this. Pornography is a vice, and it is becoming more and more widespread. It's accessible to anybody on any phone, anywhere because of the internet. Pornography is available to everyone, men, women, boys, girls, everybody. The typical age, and I as a pastor, this is kind of the thing that it's shocking. I mean, the average age a child is first exposed to pornography is about seven or 8 years old. That's typical standard in the West, because we have our phones, because of the TV programs and the loose ratings and all of those kind of things. So pornography is a massive vice, because you have pornography, and it's not just people committing acts on camera. There's images, there's pictures, they call it soft porn, which is not full imagery, but other things. And then, of course, there's romance books. There's so many of these romance fantasy books out there. There's huge libraries for them. There's a huge market for them that are exotic tales, and typically they cater towards females. Some men read them. I've never read one, but some men read them. So it's not about that. What it's about is that's another vice that we have to guard ourselves for and be careful around. And then, of course, having fantasies about imaginations and imaginary role play in our brains about someone who's not our spouse. That's also another vice that we can fall into. So now that we've kind of established that, and again, these are things we need to be talking about in the church. We need to be talking about pornography. We need to be talking about adultery. We have to talk about these things in the church. If not in the church, through a biblical worldview, where are we going to talk about them? Line 203. Not only is the outward act of adultery forbidden, but also every kind of cause, motive, and means of adultery. Then the heart, the lips, and the whole body may be chaste and offer no opportunity, help, or persuasion toward inchastity. What behaviors can be the acts of adultery? I think one of them is emotional affairs. I've been married, for 24 years just about, and some of you have been married longer than that. Emotional affairs are a very real thing, and they can happen anywhere. And it's not about having a relationship or a healthy friendship with someone of the opposite sex, but it's about allowing your emotions to be engaged in that relationship and in that person in an intimate way that goes beyond just a normal friendship and healthy relationship, but where actually secrets are being told, where intimate parts of your life are being shared with one another that really is not your business. And most normal people will understand those boundaries. And there's things that we don't need to talk about with other people. Here's one thing that I will forbid any woman ever that wants to come to me for any kind of advice. Don't complain about your husband. Don't come to me and complain about your husband unless your husband is in the room with you. That's it. Don't write me complaining about your husband. Don't do it. I don't want to hear it. Okay? Eric, you're mean. You're not helpful. No, it's called boundaries. It's called having boundaries. When we have unhealthy interests in the private life of someone of the opposite sex, it's very unhealthy outside of marriage. Okay. In my line of work, I've lived in the same state my whole life. I know tons of women, and having a very appropriate relationship means not talking about the intimate parts of their lives. They're none of my business. What do I need to know? Let's talk church. Let's talk the word. Let's talk politics. Let's talk sports. Those things are appropriate. But things that are not inappropriate are things in their heart that can lead me to lend my heart and my spirit to them in an unhealthy way, we'll just say. What boundaries should married couples put around their hearts and relationship to guard against adulterous behaviors? The first thing is be honest about the issues. Okay, be honest about the issues. If you're, let your spouse know if there is someone of the opposite sex that maybe doesn't understand those boundaries, that is getting too close, or maybe you feel like you're getting a little too close and you need to have them help you guard them. It's very important that you have that relationship with your wife and that you have that relationship with your husband so you can guard one another. Okay, don't be embarrassed. Don't get mad at your spouse, or you know what I'm saying? Guard one another away from these things. Don't be suspicious of one another, but be aware. Okay, suspicion never helps anybody. Okay, if there is a concern, then go and have an honest conversation about it. Line 206. But this commandment is aimed directly at the state of marriage and gives us an opportunity to speak about it. First, understand and mark how gloriously God honors and praises this estate. For by his commandment, he both approves and guards it. He has approved it above in the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother, but here he has, as we said, hedged it about and protected it. So now we've discussed all the things that, can kind of come at and chip away at the foundation of your marriage and lead to those adulterous mindsets and behaviors. But I want to ask this question: why is marriage such an important anchor to society? Why is a healthy marriage so important to our neighborhoods, our communities, and our families? I think number one is all relationships were created from marriage. Every sibling, I have siblings, some of you have siblings, that sibling relationship came from marriage, came from a husband and wife, came from the covenant, the sexual covenant that they celebrated, thus conceiving you and your sibling, and here you are today. All the cousin relationship, friendship relationship, because humans came from a mother and a father, from a husband and a wife. Now, procreation belongs to man. God entrusted procreation to man, and he put some parameters around it. Who did God create? What people did God create? Adam and Eve. Those were it. Those are the only two people he created. Now, we say God created us, and he did because he created the ability for humans to procreate. but he he gave us the ability to procreate. Then he put the boundaries of marriage around it because he wanted society to be stable. And we have to have an anchor. We have to have a blueprint to know where society should be. Why did God institute marriage? Number one, I believe because it displays his relationship with the church, the bridegroom and the bride. We are the bride. He is the bridegroom. He is pursuing us. He gave his life up for us. He is coming back for us. That's why the homosexual relationship is a blasphemy to marriage, because it does not. You can't have a bridegroom and a bridegroom. You can't have a bride and a bride. You have to have a bridegroom and a bride. Those are two different genders, two different roles. Society, doesn't care about that, but we as followers of Jesus understand that. And it's also important, marriage, because it builds society. It creates trust in a foundation. Okay, my parents have been married for like 50 years. Naomi's parents have been married for 50 years. So my parents, I think, are 48 or 49 or whatever. Many of you have been married for long periods of time. But I'm sure you've met somebody, or maybe you've even gone through a divorce. Now, let me say this. If you've gone through a divorce, please allow God to heal you, and he will. God will forgive you. He will restore you. And I've seen people on their second or third marriages that absolutely thrive. But the first thing you have to do is allow God to heal and forgive you so that you can forgive yourself. So there's no shame or condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, correct? Okay? But if you've known someone who has gone through a divorce, growing up, some of my very closest friends, their parents went through a divorce, and it just totally destroyed the kids because their emotional foundation and their emotional stability for life was completely broken apart. We are designed in a family unit that the mother and the father create that rock, that foundation, that healthy stability through all of life's up and down. There is a relationship that they can cling to, whether kids can articulate it or not. And I've even known adults, their parents, split up in the adult life. And it's tragic when that happens because although they can navigate it and understand, a lot of the reasoning behind it and some of the practical things, it still does kind of chip away at the stable foundation they've come up their lives kind of clinging to. And God designed it that way. How can honoring your father and mother coincide with this commandment? Now, if your estate is designed to be honored, you will live this way. If you know that your marriage is more than just everyday living and trying to survive and pay the bills and do this and do that, fix the house and all that. If you know that there is something more that is involved in that process and in that relationship, you're going to live like it. You're going to display like it. You're going to work at it like that. Marriage takes work. It takes energy. It takes effort. It takes forgiveness. It takes compromise. It takes surrender. It takes all those things on a daily basis. Mainly because, the person that you marry is different 20 years down the road because life has shaped them. The choices they've made, good and bad, life has a way of shaping you. Your career, the church you go to, your family, your in-laws, the children you have, and all the situations that comes up with. You're different. I'm a different person at 47 than I was at 21 when I got married. Very different. Line 208, and I'm getting ready to wrap it up here, so make sure you guys are watching the clock in the back. I don't know if it's been changed since daylight savings, but here we go. Line 208. Therefore, God has also most richly blessed this estate above all others. In addition, he has bestowed on it and wrapped up in it everything in the world, so that this estate might be well and richly provided for. Married life is therefore no joke or presumption. It is an excellent thing and a matter of divine seriousness. For marriage has the highest importance to God, so that people are raised up who may serve the world and promote the knowledge of God, godly living, and all virtues to fight against wickedness and the devil. Whew! There's a whole lot that Luther is trying to teach us there. How has God blessed the marriage relationship above all others? The marriage relationship is so fascinating because you take two people who are not related to each other, who are raised in different many times in different homes, different value systems, different cultures. My wife and I, when we got married, two very different cultures. One family was massively huge. The other family was very small. And that created, at the very beginning of our marriage, and that created at the beginning of our marriage conflict and confusion, because my wife didn't understand how I couldn't adapt to this massive family. And I was like, there's too many people. I can't keep it all straight. And it was too overwhelming for me. But he takes those two and he brings them together and makes them one, so that you create your own family, your own culture, your own value system. My wife and I decided that when we got married, one of the number one things that we committed to, and we've always followed this, is we will always stay committed to the local church. Since we've been married, we've not attended many churches. And every time we've switched from one church to another, it was a very natural progression. We never left every church that we've ever gone to, we have phenomenal relationships with, because we love them and they're our brothers and sisters. So we've never left a church out of anger. Sometimes people move on, there's different reasons and different things, and it just happens. But I digress into saying, it is such an amazing blessing on that relationship, because as siblings, you have the number one thing in common is your parents. And your parents are the one creating that culture and creating that ecosystem of your home. Line 211, and I'm going to stop here, so hopefully, even if there's time left, stop or whatever. But line 211. In the second place, you must know also that marriage is not only an honorable, but also necessary state. In general and in all conditions, it is solemnly commanded by God that men and women who were created for marriage shall be found in this estate. Yet there are some expectations whom God has especially set apart. They are not fit for the married estate, or there are individuals whom he has released by a high and supernatural gift, so they can mainly chastity without this estate. Matthew 19:11. But he said to them, not everyone who can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. And there are eunuchs who have been made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this. So what you know is a eunuch is typically a man who has had their genitals removed, so that they will not have any relations with any of the females in the temple. Now, some by birth, which is rare, but they were, either castrated or born without them, or however that kind of works, which is not typical, but it has happened. There are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. In other words, they're not castrating themselves for Jesus, but what they are doing is they're taking self-control over their body to say, you know what, I am not going to participate in any of these things that could compromise the kingdom of God. And that was a big reason for the eunuchs, is they didn't want them mating with the other females in the palace and in the kingdom, thus creating problems in the royal line, or in the temple, or in the castle, or in the palace, or wherever it could be. So they have said, and that's, I think, especially we have to teach our young people, and especially our young men, is that we need to take ownership and take control and allow the Holy Spirit to give us that discipline over our flesh, so that we will not give into those desires. And I think that that's how I want to close this, is how do we teach our young people to control themselves until marriage, we'll say. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was a big purity culture. So there was all these purity commitments, and there was just all this striving and all this guilt if there was any kind of failure. And you went through all these classes, and you went through this kind of cookie cutter model to try and remain pure until marriage. And how many of you know you can be very, very immoral before marriage and never have sex one time, in your mind and in your heart? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different things. But what we want to do is we want to teach our young people to come into submission to Christ, allow our bodies and our flesh to be submitted to Christ so that we can be free from those things and practice the overcoming of the temptation that comes at us until the time comes for us to enter into that marriage covenant. My wife and I taught a series, and we've done it many years. We call it God's Plan. And we talk at length about human sexuality. We talk about gender. We talk about the way God created man and woman, the way he created marriage, the way he created sex to be, why sex is great in marriage, why it's dangerous outside of marriage. We leave no stone unturned. And I'd do it here at Living Word if you had young people that were interested in it. But I think that it's so important because we have an oversexed culture, a culture in the United States and in the West that is saturated with sex. Sex is everywhere. But how do we counter that? Do we keep it quiet? And, I don't want to talk about sex because I don't want to talk. We have curious young people. We have curious children. They're curious about it, and we want them to understand God's way, God's design, and God's protection for it because we want them, at the end of the day to have satisfying sex lives. Sex should be very satisfying. Sex should be very exciting. Sex is very beautiful. And we want that in the context of marriage between one man and one woman, the way God designed it to be. So thank you guys very much. I will be back next Sunday. Pray for me if you remember it. Just, there's a lot of travel involved in these appointments and, crossing the border. It's super easy, but there's always a little bit of anxiety that comes to it too, going into Mexico, coming out of Mexico, and everything that involves. But I will be back in a few days, hopefully, to finally get this crown put in here so I can stop having this gap in my tooth that I always have to hide like this. Anyway, God bless you, and the rest of this, take home. Do a little devotion with your spouse or with your in your quiet time and really consider these things. And we will get into commandment number 7 next week. Go pick up your kids.